My name is Harper Jordan. I am 28 years old. Last Thursday, I stood on my parents' pristine mahogany porch in the freezing Seattle rain, holding a foil-wrapped pecan pie. I was exactly 10 minutes late to Thanksgiving dinner because of a 4-car pileup on Interstate 5. When I reached for the heavy brass handle, it refused to give. The deadbolt was thrown tight. Through the decorative frosted glass of the front door, the warm glow of the chandelier spilled onto the wet concrete. I could trace the shifting shadows of 20 relatives gathering around the dining table. I could hear the faint, muffled sound of my Uncle David laughing. My fingers were going numb against the aluminum pie tin. My phone vibrated against my hip. I shifted the pie to one hand and pulled the screen into the dim porch light. It was a text from Sophia, the woman who raised me. 10 minutes late, the door is locked. Let this be a punishment for your chronic disrespect. You can eat leftovers in the kitchen when we are finished. The words sat there on the glowing screen, sharp and familiar. For 28 years, this was the invisible currency of our household. Love was never given freely. It was earned through rigid obedience. A slight deviation from Sylvia's schedule meant public humiliation disguised as maternal discipline. I pictured my father, Richard, sitting at the far end of the table, his eyes fixed firmly on his plate, ignoring the empty chair where I was supposed to be. I pictured my sister, Chloe, the golden child, pouring wine and pretending not to notice. I am a lead UX designer. I manage a team of 6. I pay the mortgage on my own townhouse. Yet standing on that porch, the cold seeping through my boots, Sophia expected me to revert to the frightened teenager who used to beg for readmission into the family. She expected me to sit on the damp wicker patio chair, shivering, for 2 hours, waiting for her to open the door and offer a disappointed sigh before allowing me a plate of cold turkey. The heat from the pie was fading. The wind off the Puget Sound whipped rain against my cheeks. I stared at the brass lock. A strange, quiet clarity washed over me. I did not knock. I did not type out a frantic apology. I did not shed a single tear. I just turned my back on the frosted glass. I walked down the driveway, the wet autumn leaves crunching beneath my boots. I unlocked my Honda, tossed the pie onto the passenger seat, and put the car in drive. Sylvia thought she was locking me out to teach me a lesson. She did not know I had a manila envelope sitting in my glove box. She did not know I had an address scribbled on a sticky note. And she certainly did not know I was about to spend Thanksgiving with my biological mother, a woman who had been searching for me since the day I was born. Before I tell you what I found at that address, please take a second to hit like and subscribe to Sophia Told Stories. Do it only if you know what it feels like to finally stop begging for love. Drop your age and where you are listening from in the comments. I want to know who is sitting with me right now. Let me take you back to the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. The afternoon I found the false bottom in Sylvia's antique filing cabinet. The heater in my Honda is blasting, but I cannot stop shivering. My hands grip the steering wheel so tight, my knuckles match the pale glow of the dashboard. Beside me on the passenger seat, the pecan pie is slowly turning cold. I press my foot on the gas pedal and put the sprawling brick houses of my parents' neighborhood behind me. The rain washes over the windshield in heavy sheets. I reach over and pop open the glove box. The small yellow bulb illuminates a stack of napkins, an old tire pressure gauge, and a crisp manila envelope. The edges of that envelope are sharp. The paper is stiff. Just looking at it makes my stomach twist into a tight knot. To understand why I did not cry on that porch tonight, you need to know what I found inside that envelope 48 hours ago. Tuesday afternoon, I was off the clock from my design firm. Sylvia called me around noon. Her wireless router was acting up and she demanded I drive over to fix it. She did not ask. She never asks. She expects. I spent 2 hours crawling under her antique desk, untangling cords while she stood in the doorway holding a cup of herbal tea, complaining about my posture and how my haircut made my face look round. Her home office is a reflection of her mind. Sterile, organized, Everything has a designated place. The air always smells of lemon furniture polish and expensive candles. When the internet finally reconnected, she walked into the kitchen to call her friends, leaving me alone to gather my tools. I stood up too fast. My shoulder bumped hard against the side of her heavy oak filing cabinet. It was an antique piece, the kind with thick brass handles and deep drawers holding decades of tax returns and property deeds. The impact rattled the wood. A strange wooden clatter echoed from the bottom drawer. I knelt down to inspect the damage, pulling the heavy bottom drawer open to make sure the tracks were not bent. The drawer was packed tight with folders, but the bottom panel of the drawer itself had popped loose. It was resting at an uneven angle. A false bottom. My breath caught in my throat. Sylvia never mentioned a hidden compartment. The woman labeled her spice rack by alphabetical order and origin. Secrets did not fit her pristine aesthetic, unless those secrets were dangerous. I reached out and lifted the thin slab of oak. The smell of stale dust hit my nose instantly. It was the scent of trapped air, of things buried and meant to be forgotten. Resting in the shallow cavity beneath the wood was a single manila envelope. There was no writing on the outside. The clasp was bent flat. I should have put the wood back. I should have closed the drawer and walked out the front door. But a cold, crawling sensation traveled down my spine. My fingers trembled as I picked up the envelope. The paper felt heavy. I unbent the metal clasp and pulled out the contents, letting them slide onto the carpet. The first document was a birth certificate. The paper was old, yellowing at the corners, bearing the official seal of King County. I scanned the typed ink. The hospital listed was Seattle General. The date of birth was October 12th, 1997, my exact birthday. My exact birth hospital. I moved my eyes up to the name of the child. It did not say Harper Jordan. The name typed in bold black ink was Lily Bennett. Beside the child's name was the mother's name, Clara Bennett. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I stared at the name Clara Bennett. My entire life, for 28 years, Sylvia fed me a very specific narrative about my origin. She told me my biological mother was a nameless addict. She told me I was left in a cardboard box in the freezing parking lot of Seattle General. Sylvia would sit on the edge of my bed when I was a child, brushing my hair, telling me how nobody wanted me, how I was broken goods until she and Richard mercifully opened their home and saved me from the foster system. She used that story as a leash. Whenever I spoke out of turn, whenever I got a grade lower than an A, she would shake her head and say it was the bad blood showing. She made me feel like a stray dog lucky to be sleeping on the rug. But the paper in my trembling hands had a name. Clara Bennett was not a ghost. She was a documented person. I set the birth certificate down and picked up the next item. It was a thick report printed on the letterhead of a private investigation firm in Portland. The date on the report was from 1999. I was 2 years old then. I flipped through the pages. It detailed the daily movements of Clara Bennett, where she bought groceries, what diner she waitressed at, what kind of car she drove. There were grainy photographs stapled to the back pages. A young woman with auburn hair, my auburn hair, sitting on a bus bench looking exhausted and heartbroken. Why would Sylvia hire a private investigator to stalk a woman who supposedly abandoned me in a parking lot? It made no sense. The pieces of my reality were cracking apart, exposing a dark, terrifying void underneath. Then I saw the final piece of paper. It was a small, square sticky note pressed against the back of the investigation report. The ink was faded blue. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was the sharp, precise cursive of my adoptive father, Richard. Richard is a senior partner at a corporate law firm. He writes his letters with sharp angles. The note contained only 2 sentences. Clara is still looking. We need to move again. I sat on the floor of Sylvia's pristine home office, the stale dust filling my lungs, the air suddenly turning to lead. Clara is still looking. The words echoed in my skull. A mother who abandoned her child in a parking lot does not spend years looking for them. A mother who does not care does not force a wealthy family to pack up and move across state lines to hide. They did not rescue me. They ran away with me. I remember hearing Sylvia's footsteps tapping against the hardwood floor in the hallway. Panic seized my chest. I hastily folded the documents, shoved them back into the envelope, and tucked the envelope into the waistband of my jeans, pulling my oversized sweater down to hide it. I slapped the false bottom back into place, slammed the drawer shut, and stood up just as Sylvia walked into the room to complain about the internet speed. I smiled, nodded, and walked out of that house carrying the evidence of a stolen life. Now, sitting in my idling car outside the Thanksgiving dinner I was just locked out of, the shock has hardened into something else. The fear is gone. In its place is a sharp, burning need for the truth. I grab my phone from the cup holder. 2 days ago, before I left Sylvia's house, I memorized the last known address listed in that private investigator's report. I type the street name into the GPS. The digital map loads. A blue line traces a path out of the wealthy Seattle suburbs and points southward, 42 miles away. The estimated drive time is 48 minutes. Richard's text message flashes at the top of my screen again. He is asking me to apologize through the door. He wants me to beg for a plate of cold turkey. He wants to maintain the illusion of his perfect, respectable family while he hides a felony in his bottom drawer. I swipe the notification away. I put the car in drive and pull away from the curb. The rain is coming down harder now, blurring the streetlights into streaks of gold and red. The highway stretches out in front of me, slick and dark. I do not know what I will find at the end of this blue line. I do not know if Clara Bennett still lives there. I do not know if she will even open the door. But I am driving toward the woman they spent 28 years running from. And I'm bringing the envelope with me. Interstate 5 stretches out like a wet, black ribbon. The rhythmic, hypnotic swipe of the windshield wipers serves as the only metronome for my racing thoughts. Rubber dragging across glass, back and forth, clearing the heavy Seattle downpour for mere seconds before the deluge obscures the view again. My Honda cuts through the dark, the tires hissing over the slick asphalt. 42 miles. It feels like an impossible distance, yet somehow the journey is moving far too fast. I grip the steering wheel, feeling the worn leather under my palms, the heater blowing warm air that does nothing to thaw the ice in my chest. A war zone erupts inside my mind. For 2 days, adrenaline fueled my courage, but now the crushing weight of reality settles into my bones. What if the address on that faded private investigator report is decades out of date? People move. They change states, change names, start over. What if Clara Bennett is long gone? Worse, a toxic whisper slithers into my thoughts, sounding terrifyingly like Sylvia. What if Sylvia told a fraction of the truth? What if Clara was a troubled teenager who could not handle a baby? What if knocking on that door tonight only reopens a wound this stranger spent 28 years trying to close? I am driving toward a ghost, carrying a manila envelope that holds the power to detonate multiple lives. The sudden, harsh buzzing of my cell phone shatters the quiet cabin. It vibrates against the plastic cup holder, a relentless, demanding noise. I glance down. The screen glows bright, displaying the caller identification. Richard, my adoptive father. He does not call often. He prefers to communicate through secretaries or brief, sterile emails. Richard is a senior partner at a prestigious downtown firm, a man who commands courtrooms and negotiates multi-million-dollar corporate mergers. Yet, inside the walls of his own home, he is a shadow. He is a master of the lowered gaze, the quiet exit, the tactical retreat whenever Sylvia begins her tyrannical rants. I let the phone ring. I watch the screen illuminate the dark interior of my car, remembering a specific evening when I was 15. Sylvia had cornered me in the kitchen, berating me for a solid hour because my skirt was cut an inch above the knee. She called me cheap. She said my bad genetics were finally showing. Richard stood right there, leaning against the marble island, swirling a glass of scotch. He never met my eyes. He just studied the amber liquid, waiting for the storm to pass, perfectly content to let his teenage daughter absorb the verbal blows so he would not have to. The ringing finally stops. The car plunges back into the rhythmic sound of the wipers. 2 minutes later, a sharp chime signals a text message. I keep one hand on the wheel and tap the screen. The preview bubble pops up. "Harper, your mother is furious. Just apologize through the door so we can eat." I stare at those words as the highway lines blur past. The sheer audacity of his request makes my jaw clench. He does not ask where I am. He does not express concern that his daughter is driving blindly into a freezing storm on a holiday. He only cares about the disruption to his evening. He wants me to walk back up those mahogany steps, stand in the freezing rain, and swallow my pride through a locked wooden door. He wants me to play the role of the repentant, broken child. Why? Because if I do not, Sylvia will direct her venom at him. I am the designated shock absorber for his marriage. As long as I am there to take the hits, Richard gets to enjoy his quiet scotch and his peaceful Thanksgiving turkey. Something fundamental hardens inside my chest. For years I played my part. I traded my dignity for scraps of their conditional affection. I hit the power button on the phone, turning the screen black, and toss the device onto the passenger seat next to the now cold pecan pie. I am done. I will never apologize to that door again. The GPS voice breaks the silence, instructing me to take the next exit. I flick my turn signal, guiding the Honda off the sprawling interstate and onto a narrow, poorly lit 2-lane road. The transition is stark. The towering iron gates, manicured hedges, and sprawling colonial estates of Sylvia's zip code fade away in the rearview mirror. The landscape shifts into a quiet, working-class suburb. Streetlights flicker intermittently. Modest ranch-style homes sit close together on small plots of land. I drive past cracked sidewalks and chain-link fences. I see faded plastic tricycles left out in front yards. Basketball hoops with fraying nets standing proudly in cracked concrete driveways. There is no pretense here. No invisible homeowners associations dictating the color of the siding or the height of the grass. It is raw, lived in, and remarkably human. As I navigate these unfamiliar streets, the gravity of the stolen files hits me from a new angle. Sylvia always claimed she rescued me from a life of squalor, painting a picture of inescapable poverty and misery. She weaponized her wealth, using her country club memberships and Ivy League expectations as proof of her maternal sacrifice. Looking at these homes, I do not see misery. I see warmth. I see living rooms glowing with television light, families huddled inside away from the Seattle dampness. If the papers in my glove box hold the truth, this was the world intended for me. A world where perhaps love was not measured by academic trophies or rigid compliance. The automated voice of the navigation system chimes again, announcing that my destination is approaching on the right. My foot eases off the accelerator. The car slows to a crawl. My heart shifts into a frantic, hammering rhythm, beating so hard against my ribs I can feel the pulse echoing in my throat. I scan the house numbers painted on the wooden mailboxes. 411, 413, 415. I tap the brakes. The Honda rolls to a stop in front of a small, single-story house sided in faded blue vinyl. It is unassuming, sitting quietly under the canopy of a large, dripping oak tree. But what catches my breath is the light. A warm, amber porch light glows fiercely through the driving rain, casting a welcoming circle over the concrete steps. The driveway is empty, save for an older model sedan parked near a detached garage. I shift the gear into park. The engine idles, humming a low vibration through the floorboards. The rhythmic swipe of the wipers continues, slicing back and forth. I sit in the driver's seat, my hands trembling as I turn off the ignition. The sudden quiet of the cabin is deafening, leaving only the sound of rain drumming against the metal roof. I look toward the glowing window of the blue house. A shadow moves behind the curtain. Someone is inside, someone who might share my eyes, my cheekbones, my blood. I take a deep, shuddering breath, reach over to grab the heavy manila envelope, and place my hand on the cold door handle. I turn off the ignition. The low hum of the Honda engine dies, plunging the cabin into a sudden, suffocating silence. Only the sound of the rain drumming against the metal roof remains. I sit in the driver's seat for a long time, staring through the wet windshield at the modest blue house. My hands are still gripping the steering wheel. I have to physically force my fingers to uncurl. They are stiff, aching from the tension of the 42-mile drive. I reach over to the passenger seat and pick up the manila envelope. The rough texture of the paper scrapes against my cold fingertips. This thin cardboard pouch feels heavier than anything I have ever lifted. I push the car door open and step out into the freezing November night. The bitter Seattle wind bites through my oversized sweater, but I barely register the temperature. I kick the door shut. The metallic slam echoes down the quiet suburban street. There are no wrought iron security gates here, no pristine chemical-smelling landscaping. Just a short, concrete driveway, cracked in the center, with a few stubborn weeds pushing through the cement. Wet autumn leaves plaster the ground, slick and brown. My boots hit the concrete. The walk up this short driveway feels akin to marching toward the edge of a sheer cliff. Every step requires a conscious, grueling effort. My legs feel like they are submerged in deep water. I focus on the ground, watching the tips of my boots crush the wet leaves. The crunching sound is loud in the quiet night. I am terrified of what waits on the other side of that wooden door. For nearly 3 decades, my identity was an established fact. I was Harper Jordan, the unwanted orphan rescued by the grace and wealth of Sylvia and Richard. I had a script. It was a miserable, suffocating script, but it was known. What happens when the foundation of your entire existence turns out to be a forged document? I reach the base of the porch. There are 3 wooden steps leading up to a small, covered landing. A faded welcome mat rests in front of the door. An amber light bulb glows above, casting a warm, protective circle against the dark rain. I step onto the first plank. It groans softly under my weight. I freeze, holding my breath, waiting for a guard dog to bark or a floodlight to blind me. Nothing happens. The neighborhood remains still. I take the remaining 2 steps and stand in front of the door. My heart is beating an erratic, frantic rhythm against my ribs. To my left, a large front window is partially obscured by drawn curtains, but the fabric is not pulled entirely shut. A narrow gap allows a sliver of golden light to spill out onto the porch. I inch closer to the glass, careful to stay hidden in the shadows. Sound drifts through the thin window pane. Music is playing. It is a classic soul track, something rich and upbeat, featuring a steady bass line and joyful horns. Over the music, I hear voices. Several people are talking at once, their sentences overlapping in a comfortable, chaotic rhythm. Then, a laugh breaks through the chatter. It is a deep, resonant, uninhibited sound, the kind of genuine laughter that bubbles up from the chest and fills a room. I hear the clinking of glasses, the scrape of a chair being pushed back, the lively debate over who gets the last dinner roll. It is a family, a real, living, breathing family enjoying Thanksgiving dinner. I stand there in the freezing rain, pressing my back against the damp vinyl siding, and a wave of suffocating grief crashes over me. It is a physical ache, sharp and tight, constricting my throat. I close my eyes and listen to the warmth radiating from the other side of the glass. If the files sitting in my hand are real, if that birth certificate belongs to me, then this was the life that was stolen from me. I think about the dining room I just left 40 miles away. Thanksgiving at Sylvia's house was never a celebration. It was a high-stakes performance review. We sat at a long mahogany table set with imported crystal goblets and antique silverware. Nobody spoke over each other. Laughter was measured, polite, and only deployed when Richard made a dry observation about the stock market. The air was always thick with unspoken rules. Sit up straight. Use the correct fork. Do not speak unless addressed. I remember a Thanksgiving when I was 12 years old. My sister Chloe accidentally knocked her water glass over. The water spilled onto the Irish linen tablecloth. Sylvia did not yell. She just stopped chewing, placed her silverware down, and stared at Chloe until my sister began to hyperventilate. The rest of the meal was eaten in agonizing silence. I was traded for that. I was taken from a home where people laughed with their whole chests and placed into a sterile mansion where love was a currency you had to earn through flawless obedience. The injustice of it burns the back of my eyes. A tear escapes, mixing with the rain on my cold cheeks. I look down at the envelope in my hands. The answers are right here. I just need to knock. I square my shoulders and face the door. I raise my right hand. I form a fist. I hover my knuckles an inch away from the painted wood. But I cannot bridge the final gap. My arm is paralyzed. A fresh wave of terror washes the anger away. Imposter syndrome whispers dark warnings in my ear. What if I am wrong? What if the private investigator report is a coincidence? What if Clara Bennett had another child, and I am about to ruin their holiday with the delusions of a desperate woman? I am a stranger standing in the dark, holding a stolen file. Who am I to shatter the peace of this warm, happy home? They are laughing. They are celebrating. They do not know I exist. My fist trembles in the air. The music inside shifts to a slower, softer melody. The voices murmur in comfortable agreement. I cannot do it. The risk is too high. The fear of rejection is a physical barrier I cannot push through. Sylvia already threw me away once today. If I knock on this door and the woman inside looks at me with confusion or worse, pity, it will break whatever fragile pieces of my sanity are left. I lower my hand. My fingers unfurl, dropping to my side. I turn my body away from the door, gripping the envelope to my chest. I will go back to the car. I will drive back to my townhouse in Seattle. I will put this envelope in a shredder and pretend I never opened that bottom drawer. It is the safe choice. It is the coward's choice. I take one step toward the edge of the porch. Before my boot can touch the stairs, the brass handle of the front door turns with a sharp, metallic click. The sound roots me to the spot. My breath catches in my throat. I spin around just as the heavy door swings outward. A sudden, intense blast of heat hits my freezing face. It carries the rich, intoxicating aroma of roasted turkey, melted butter, and cinnamon-baked apples. The sudden change in temperature makes me blink. Standing in the doorway is a woman. She is wearing a dark green sweater, holding a large black plastic trash bag in her left hand. She is looking down, trying to navigate the threshold while pushing the screen door open with her shoulder. She hums along to the music playing inside. She steps out onto the porch, right into the circle of amber light. She looks up. She stops dead in her tracks. We are less than 2 feet apart. The rain continues to fall in the darkness beyond the porch, but in this small circle of light, time simply ceases to exist. I cannot breathe. I cannot speak. I just stare at the woman standing in front of me, waiting for the reality of the situation to shatter us both. The heavy plastic trash bag slips from her fingers. It hits the wooden porch floor with a dull, heavy thud. A glass jar inside the bag clinks against a tin can, a sharp sound that cuts through the steady rhythm of the rain. She does not reach down to pick it up. Her hands remain suspended in the air, frozen mid-motion, as she stares at my face. The woman standing 2 feet away from me is in her early 50s. The amber porch light casts a warm glow over her features, illuminating a truth so profound it steals the breath right out of my lungs. She has my cheekbones. They are high and pronounced, the exact same bone structure I have seen in the mirror every morning of my adult life. She has my hair. It is a rich, dark auburn, pulled back loosely with a few damp strands framing her face. For 28 years, I grew up in a household of pale blondes. Sylvia, Richard, and my sister Chloe all shared the same icy, fair complexion. I was the glaring anomaly in every family portrait. Sylvia used to tell her country club friends my unruly dark hair was a tragic reflection of my unfortunate origins. She spent a fortune on salon treatments trying to lighten it, trying to force me to blend into her pristine aesthetic. Looking at the woman in the doorway, I realized my hair was never unruly. It was just an inheritance Sylvia could not bleach away. But the most staggering detail, the one that anchors me to the wooden planks of this porch, is her eyes. They are a striking shade of hazel, flecked with gold around the pupil. They are my eyes. We stand there, trapped in a suspended bubble of time, separated by a thin threshold of space and nearly 3 decades of fabricated history. The freezing wind whips around us, blowing mist onto the landing, but neither of us shivers. I watch the color drain from her cheeks. Her skin turns pale, the rosy flush of the warm house vanishing in an instant. Her breathing grows shallow, her chest rising and falling in rapid, uneven hitches. The expression on her face is impossible to categorize. It is a haunting mixture of profound terror and an agonizing, desperate hope. She looks at me the way someone looks at a ghost they have spent their entire life praying to see. She swallows hard, her throat working. Her lips part, but no sound comes out at first. She tries again, and her voice shakes so severely it is barely more than a fragile whisper. "Can I help you?" The question hangs in the damp air. It is a polite, ordinary greeting, the kind you offer a lost delivery driver or a neighbor needing a favor. But the tremor in her tone reveals she already knows I am neither of those things. The instinctual, biological recognition has already bypassed her logical brain. My throat feels like dry sandpaper. The manila envelope in my hand suddenly weighs 1,000 pounds. I look down at it, then back up to her face. I need to speak. I need to shatter the glass house Sylvia built. But forming the words feels like trying to swallow broken glass. I force myself to draw a breath of the cold, rain-soaked air. My name is Harper Jordan. Her brow furrows slightly at the name. It means nothing to her. Harper Jordan is a fiction, a character created by a wealthy woman looking for a prop to complete her perfect family. I take another breath, stepping a fraction of an inch closer to the warmth radiating from the open door. But I think my name was supposed to be Lily. The reaction is instantaneous. The woman lets out a sound I will never forget for as long as I live. It is not a gasp. It is not a cry or a scream. It is a visceral, guttural noise that tears its way up from the very bottom of her soul. It is the sound of a heart breaking open, of 28 years of suppressed agony rushing to the surface all at once. Her knees buckle. The strength vanishes from her legs entirely. She begins to collapse toward the wooden floorboards. Instinct takes over. I drop the manila envelope. It hits the wet welcome mat with a soft slap. I lunge forward, throwing my arms out to catch her before she hits the ground. My hands grip her shoulders, and her arms fly up, wrapping around my forearms. Our bodies collide. It is the first time I have ever touched my biological mother. The impact is jarring, yet incredibly grounding. I can smell the cinnamon-baked apples from the kitchen clinging to her dark green sweater, mixed with the clean scent of laundry detergent. It is a warm, maternal smell. Sylvia never smelled like this. Sylvia smelled like expensive chemical perfumes and sterile hairspray. Sylvia gave stiff, measured pats on the back, always ensuring an inch of space remained between us so I would not wrinkle her silk blouses. The woman in my arms does not care about wrinkles. She grips my forearms with a desperate, crushing strength. Her fingernails dig into the thick wool of my sleeves. She pulls herself up slightly, refusing to let her knees touch the porch, using my body as a physical anchor. She is shaking uncontrollably, her entire frame vibrating against mine. Tears spill over her eyelashes, streaming down her pale cheeks in hot, rapid tracks. She tilts her head back, looking directly into my face. Her hazel eyes search every inch of my features, cataloging the shape of my jaw, the slope of my nose, the curve of my brow. She is verifying the miracle. She's making sure I am not an illusion conjured by the holiday grief. Sylvia told me you died. The 5 words are a fragile, broken whisper, but they hit my chest with the force of a freight train. The air leaves my lungs. The porch, the rain, the amber light, the distant hum of the highway, everything fades into a ringing silence. My brain short-circuits, struggling to process the sheer magnitude of the sentence. Sylvia told me you died. For 2 days, I believed I was the victim of a forced, secretive adoption. I believed Sylvia paid off a vulnerable teenager to abandon her parental rights, hiding the transaction to maintain her pristine societal image. I thought the crime was manipulation. I thought the sin was keeping a young mother away from her child through intimidation and wealth. But the truth is infinitely darker. There was no secret adoption. There was no coerced paperwork signed in a shadowy hospital corridor. Sylvia did not just steal a baby. She orchestrated a death. She looked this woman in the eye, watching her grieve an unimaginable loss, and handed her an empty coffin of lies. She erased Lily Bennett from existence, then drove back to her sprawling colonial estate and dressed me in imported lace dresses, parading me around her country club as her charitable rescue mission. A new, terrifying clarity settles over me. Richard was the hospital legal counsel. He had the authority, he had the access to the medical records, he had the power to sign off on a falsified death certificate. They did not just lie to me. They committed a massive, coordinated felony. They played God. The grip on my forearms tightens. Clara is sobbing now, burying her face into the sleeve of my sweater. I wrap my arms around her shoulders, pulling her into a real, firm embrace. I hold her against the freezing wind, letting her tears soak into the wool of my coat. I rest my chin on top of her auburn hair, staring blankly out at the dark, rain-soaked driveway. Behind us, inside the warm house, the upbeat soul music continues to play. The joyous rhythm feels violently out of place. The laughter in the dining room has ceased. A voice calls out from deep within the hallway. Clara. Did the bag rip? Footsteps approach the front door. The screen door is pushed open wider. A woman in her late 60s, wearing an apron covered in flour, steps into the doorway. She holds a dish towel in her hands. She looks down at the porch, seeing Clara on her knees, clinging to a stranger in the freezing rain. The older woman stops. The dish towel slips from her hands, landing near the dropped manila envelope. Her eyes dart from Clara to me. She takes in my face, my hair, my eyes. The color drains from her face, just as it did from Clara's. She brings a trembling hand up to cover her mouth. Clara slowly pulls her face away from my sleeve. She looks back at the older woman standing in the doorway. Aunt Diane, Clara whispers, her voice thick with tears and disbelief. Look. Aunt Diane does not move. A younger woman, perhaps a few years younger than me, appears behind Diane, the cousin. She peers over Diane's shoulder, her brow furrowed in confusion, until her eyes lock onto mine. The shock ripples through the doorway like a silent contagion. Clara looks back up at me. She reaches a shaking hand toward my face, her warm fingertips gently brushing against my cold, wet cheek. It is a gesture of such profound, instinctual love that it breaks the final barrier inside my chest. A hot tear escapes my eye, tracing a path down my skin to meet her fingers. You are freezing, Clara murmurs, her maternal instinct overpowering the shock. She refuses to let go of my arm. She uses my leverage to stand up, her legs still unsteady. She looks down at the wet manila envelope resting on the welcome mat. She bends down, picking it up with careful reverence, knowing intuitively that the thin cardboard holds the missing pieces of her soul. She looks back into the hallway, then turns her gaze back to me. Her eyes harden with a sudden, fierce protectiveness. Come inside, Lily. Come home. I step over the threshold and the freezing November wind vanishes behind me. The heavy wooden door clicks shut. The warmth of the house wraps around my shivering shoulders, carrying the thick, intoxicating aroma of roasted turkey, melted butter, and baked apples. Clara gently guides me out of the narrow entryway and into the living room. The space is small, cluttered, and unapologetically lived in. A wall clock ticks a steady, grounding rhythm above a brick fireplace. I sink into the cushions of a worn floral sofa dominating the center of the room. The fabric is incredibly soft, fading near the armrests from decades of use. At Sylvia's mansion, sitting on the furniture required a rigid spine and perfect posture. Her imported Italian leather couches were designed for display, not comfort. Here, the sofa seems built to catch you when you fall. Aunt Diane and the younger woman, whose name I later learn is Maya, back away slowly. They retreat toward the kitchen doorway, giving us space, but their eyes never leave my face. They whisper to each other in hushed, urgent tones. They stare at me the way someone looks at a phantom that just materialized in their home. I am a ghost made of flesh and bone, sitting on their floral cushions. Clara does not sit down beside me right away. She walks down a short hallway and opens a louvered closet door. I hear the distinct scrape of heavy plastic dragging across hardwood floorboards. She emerges, pulling a large, opaque storage bin. The muscles in her arms strain against the weight. She hauls the container over to the wooden coffee table and drops it. The heavy thud rattles the ceramic coasters resting nearby. Clara looks at me. Her hazel eyes are red-rimmed, but her gaze is steady. "I never stopped looking," she says. Her voice trembles as she reaches out and pops the plastic lid off the bin. The scent of old ink and dry paper wafts up into the warm air. It smells like a forgotten archive, a vault of buried grief. Clara reaches inside and pulls out thick handfuls of files, dropping them onto the coffee table. My eyes scan the chaotic pile. There are police reports printed with faded blue ink. There are stacks of invoices from private investigation firms, totaling tens of thousands of dollars. And then I see the flyers. Dozens of yellowed missing person posters. Some feature a crude sketch of what a newborn might look like. Others have digitally aged composite photos, predicting what the child would resemble at 5, 10, and 15 years old. The words, "Have you seen Lily?" are printed in bold, desperate block letters across the top of every single page. Clara sits down next to me on the floral cushions. She pulls her knees together, resting her hands in her lap. She takes a deep, shuddering breath and begins to dismantle the entire foundation of my existence. The year was 1997. Clara was 19 years old. She worked 2 double shifts at a local diner just to afford a studio apartment. She had no savings account, no health insurance, and no support system besides her Aunt Diane. When she went into labor 3 weeks early, she panicked. Seattle General was the closest medical facility, so Diane drove her to their emergency room. This is where the narrative turns to ice. Sylvia was not just a wealthy suburban housewife looking to adopt a child. Sylvia was a senior hospital administrator at Seattle General. She managed the pediatric and maternity wards. She controlled the floor schedules. She commanded the staff. And her husband, Richard, was the hospital legal counsel. They were the architects of the institution. They held the keys to the records, the billing, and the bureaucracy. Clara explains the delivery. There were severe complications. Her blood pressure plummeted dangerously low. Her body went into shock. Shortly after I took my first breath, Clara slipped into a minor coma. For 3 long days, she lay unconscious in a sterile recovery ward, hooked up to intravenous lines and heart monitors. When Clara finally opened her eyes, she was disoriented, in agonizing physical pain, and entirely alone. The room was dark. She pressed the call button, desperate for news about her baby. The door opened. A woman wearing a tailored designer suit walked in. It was Sylvia. Clara describes the encounter with chilling precision. Sylvia pulled a chair right next to the hospital bed. She reached out and held Clara's trembling teenage hand. Sylvia manufactured tears. She wept as she delivered the devastating news. She told Clara her infant suffered a fatal congenital heart defect. She said the neonatal team tried everything in their power, but the baby did not survive the night. Clara begged to see her daughter. She pleaded for a chance to hold the body, to say goodbye. Sylvia squeezed her hand tighter and shook her head, citing strict health department regulations regarding infectious complications. Sylvia claimed the state had already taken custody of the remains due to Clara's unpaid medical bills and total lack of insurance coverage. Sylvia spoke with the calm, authoritative tone of a seasoned professional. They told Clara it was standard hospital policy to arrange a state burial for indigent wards. There would be no funeral. There would be no headstone. Clara looks down at her hands resting in her lap. There was no body, Clara weeps. They said the paperwork was already filed. I was 19. I was poor. I was terrified of the medical debt ruining my aunt's life. They wore white coats and carried official clipboards. They knew the law. I believed them. She wipes a fresh tear from her cheek. But a mother knows, Clara whispers. A few years later, the grief did not feel like a grave. It felt like a theft. The story never made sense. So I saved my diner tips. I hired a detective, and I started looking. I sit on the floral sofa, staring blankly at the yellowed missing person flyers. The gravity of the crime settles over my shoulders like wet concrete, crushing the breath out of my lungs. This was not a desperate back-alley adoption. This was a ruthless, calculated strike. Sylvia and Richard prowled the maternity ward looking for the perfect target. They found a vulnerable, unconscious teenager with zero financial resources and no legal representation. They forged the medical records. They fabricated a tragic death. They erased Lily Bennett from the world to create Harper Jordan. I was not adopted. I was harvested. I was plucked from a hospital bassinet simply because a wealthy administrator decided she deserved a child more than a struggling waitress did. The pristine life I lived, the Ivy League expectations, the expensive country club dinners, the imported lace dresses, it was all built on the agonizing, enduring grief of the woman sitting next to me. They stole a human being and hid the evidence behind a wall of corporate hospital policy. My stomach churns with a sudden, intense nausea. I am wearing a wool coat bought with Richard's money. I am wearing leather boots bought with Sylvia's credit card. I am a walking monument to their felony. Clara reaches back into the heavy plastic bin. She digs past the posters and the private investigator invoices. Her hand trembles slightly as she pulls out a single sheet of paper enclosed in a clear protective sleeve. It is a formal, official document. The seal of the county medical examiner is printed clearly at the top. Clara places the document gently on the coffee table right in front of me. My investigator finally broke through the hospital firewalls 5 years ago, Clara says softly. He found the death certificate they filed with the state. I lean forward, my eyes tracing the typed lines on the page. It lists the cause of death as congenital heart failure. It lists the deceased infant as Lily Bennett. But my focus drops like a stone to the bottom of the page. There is a signature line authorizing the transfer of the fictitious remains to the state morgue. It is a signature written in sharp, precise cursive. A signature I have seen on countless birthday cards, report cards, and college tuition checks. Before I can speak, a harsh, mechanical buzzing sound shatters the quiet intimacy of the living room. My cell phone is vibrating inside my coat pocket. The sudden noise is jarring, cutting through the heavy emotional weight of the documents. I reach into my pocket and pull the device out. The screen glows brightly in the dim light. It is a video call request. The name flashing across the glass is Sylvia. She is calling to demand my return. She is calling to enforce her punishment. She has no idea I am sitting 3 feet away from the woman she told me was dead. I stare at the photocopy resting on the wooden coffee table. The paper is a faded, grainy reproduction, but the black ink at the bottom is terrifyingly clear. It is a death certificate. The state seal of Washington sits near the top left corner, mocking the profound lie printed beneath it. My eyes traced the typed letters spelling out Lily Bennett. Below that, the cause of death is listed in clinical, unfeeling terms: congenital heart failure. But it is the bottom section of the page that steals the remaining oxygen from my lungs. There is a designated box for the disposition of remains. It dictates where the deceased infant was sent for burial. A small, neat checkmark sits inside the box labeled State Ward Transfer. And right next to that checkmark, authorizing the release of a fictitious corpse, is a signature. The handwriting consists of sharp, precise angles and tall, looping letters. I know this signature. I've seen it on my grade school permission slips, on my college loan applications, and on the bottom of birthday cards containing crisp $50 bills. It is the signature of Richard Jordan, my adoptive father. For nearly 3 decades, I viewed Richard through a lens of pity. I thought he was a coward. While Sylvia ruled our household with an iron fist, dictating every aspect of our lives, Richard played the role of the silent passenger. He was the man who retreated to his study with a glass of scotch whenever Sylvia started screaming. He was the man who kept his eyes glued to the financial section of the newspaper while his wife tore down my self-esteem piece by piece. I used to think his silence was a survival tactic. I believed he was just another victim of Sylvia and her relentless need for control. Looking at his signature on this fraudulent death certificate, the illusion shatters into jagged pieces. Richard was not a passive bystander. He was the architect. Sylvia may have possessed the narcissistic desire to steal a child, but Richard possessed the legal expertise to execute the crime. As the senior legal counsel for Seattle General, he understood the intricate loopholes of medical privacy laws. He knew exactly which forms to file, which bureaucratic channels to exploit, and how to bury the evidence under layers of institutional red tape. He used his prestigious law degree to kidnap an infant from a vulnerable teenage mother. A sickening realization washes over me. Just an hour ago, while I was driving through the freezing rain, Richard sent me a text message. He told me to apologize through the locked door so we could all eat in peace. He wanted me to swallow my pride and submit to Sylvia. I thought he was just trying to avoid a domestic argument. Now, I understand the terrifying truth. He was trying to maintain the perimeter. He knew that if I broke the script, if I walked away from their carefully constructed reality, the entire fragile house of cards might collapse. He was not protecting the peace of the holiday. He was protecting his own freedom. The silence in Clara's living room is thick and heavy. Aunt Diane and Maya are still standing near the kitchen threshold, their faces pale, watching me process the betrayal. Clara sits beside me on the floral sofa, her hands resting quietly in her lap, allowing me the time to absorb the magnitude of the document. Then, a harsh, sterile sound tears through the quiet room. It is my cell phone. The device is resting on the wooden coffee table, right next to the horrific paperwork. It begins to vibrate against the hard surface, emitting a relentless, demanding buzz. The sudden noise makes my heart jump into my throat. I look down at the glowing screen. The caller identification displays a single name in bold white letters: Sylvia. Beneath her name, a green video icon pulses. It is a FaceTime request. I stare at the phone as if it is a live explosive. My hands remain frozen in my lap. I cannot bring myself to reach for it. For 28 years, ignoring a call from Sylvia was considered an unforgivable offense, an act of rebellion that guaranteed weeks of icy glares and sharp insults. The conditioned response kicks in, urging my fingers to swipe the green button and offer an immediate apology for my absence. "Answer it," Clara says. Her voice cuts through the buzzing. I turn my head to look at her. The tears that were streaming down her cheeks just moments ago have stopped. Her hazel eyes, the eyes I share, are no longer filled with agonizing grief. The profound sorrow has hardened into something else. It has calcified into a cold, sharp, and terrifyingly calm resolve. She is no longer the 19-year-old girl crying in a hospital bed. She is a mother who has finally found her stolen child and she is ready to fight. "Answer it," Clara repeats, her tone steady and unyielding. Letter C. My hand trembles as I reach across the coffee table. My fingers brush against the edge of the fake death certificate before grasping the cold metal of the phone. I take a deep breath, steeling my nerves, and swipe the green icon to accept the call. I lift the phone to eye level. The screen flickers for a fraction of a second before the image stabilizes. Sylvia fills the frame. The contrast between her environment and mine is staggering. Behind her, the grand dining room of her colonial estate is in full swing. The crystal chandelier casts a brilliant, warm glow over the scene. The long mahogany table is covered with silver platters of roasted turkey, perfectly arranged side dishes, and tall, elegant wine glasses. I can see my Uncle David in the background, chewing on a dinner roll, completely oblivious to the camera. My sister Chloe is laughing at something someone said off screen. It is a picture of American aristocratic perfection. Sylvia is seated at the head of the table. She holds her phone slightly below eye level, attempting to conceal the device from the rest of the guests. She is wearing a dark silk blouse, her blonde hair styled into a flawless, immovable sweep. But her face betrays the pristine setting. Her features are twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. Her lips are pressed into a thin, white line. Her eyes are narrowed, darting across my face through the screen, searching for the familiar signs of submission and fear she is so accustomed to seeing. "Harper," Sylvia snaps. Her voice is a low, venomous whisper, calibrated perfectly so the relative sitting a few feet away cannot hear her demands. She does not ask where I am. She does not ask if I am safe driving in the freezing rain. She launches straight into the reprimand. "Your little tantrum has gone on long enough," Sylvia hisses, her eyes flashing with indignation. "I locked that door to teach you a basic lesson about respect, and you decide to run off into the night like a petulant teenager. You are embarrassing me. Aunt Martha has asked where you are 3 times already. I will not have my Thanksgiving dinner ruined by your chronic need for attention." I sit perfectly still on the floral sofa. The words wash over me, but they do not cut the way they used to. The venom has lost its sting. I am looking at a stranger. I am looking at a kidnapper wearing expensive pearls. "Get back here right now," Sylvia commands, leaning closer to her phone camera. "You will walk up those steps. You will apologize to your father and me in front of the entire family for your disruptive behavior. And then I will unlock the door. Do not test my patience today, Harper." She pauses, waiting for my frantic agreement. She expects me to nod, to beg for forgiveness, to promise I am turning the car around this very second. I do not say a word. I just stare into the camera, my face a blank, unreadable slate. Sylvia furrows her brow, sensing the shift in my demeanor. A flicker of confusion replaces the anger for a brief second. She notices the background behind me. She sees the worn, floral sofa cushions. She sees the brick fireplace and the unfamiliar ticking wall clock. "Where are you?" she demands, her voice rising a fraction of an octave. "Whose house is that?" Before I can form a reply, the sofa cushions shift beside me. Clara leans forward. She moves deliberately, sliding into the frame of the front-facing camera until her face is positioned right next to mine. Our cheekbones line up. Our auburn hair blends together. Our identical hazel eyes stare directly into the lens. On the screen, Sylvia stops breathing. The transformation is instantaneous and terrifying to witness. The color drains out of Sylvia's pristine, manicured face, leaving her skin the color of old parchment. Her jaw goes slack. Her eyes widen to impossible proportions, locking onto Clara. The background noise of the clinking wine glasses and the laughing relatives seems to fade away as the 2 women stare at each other through the digital connection. Sylvia recognizes her. Decades have passed, but the guilt of a monumental crime never truly erases the face of the victim. Clara does not raise her voice. She does not scream or throw insults. She looks right into the lens of the camera, piercing through the miles of fiber optic cables, directly into the dark, hollow core of the woman who destroyed her youth. She is not coming back, Sylvia. I watch the color drain from Sylvia's face in real time. The transformation is startling. For 28 years, this woman operated as an immovable force of terror in my life. She was a monolith of control, a master manipulator who could reduce a room of confident adults to silence with a single, sharp exhale. She curated her image with ruthless precision, ensuring every hair was sprayed into place, every word calibrated for maximum impact. She was untouched, unreachable, and entirely superior. But in this split second, staring at Clara through the digital lens of an iPhone, the pristine facade crumbles. A microscopic flinch ripples through Sylvia's left eyelid. It is a tiny, involuntary muscle spasm, a physical betrayal of the sheer panic flooding her nervous system. Her mouth falls open slightly, the flawless coral lipstick parting to reveal a sharp intake of breath. The manicured thumb that always tapped impatient rhythms on granite countertops now fumbles erratically across the glass screen. She is trying to find the red button. She is scrambling to sever the connection, desperate to close the portal she arrogantly demanded I open. The FaceTime call drops abruptly. The glowing image of the opulent dining room vanishes, replaced by a dark, reflective screen. I look down at the black glass resting in my palm. My own face stares back at me, flanked by the reflection of Clara leaning over my shoulder. The quiet of the modest living room settles around us, broken only by the steady ticking of the wall clock. I want to pause here for a moment and ask you a question. Have you ever experienced that singular, earth-shattering second when you realize the person you spent your entire life fearing is actually terrified of you finding out the truth? Have you ever watched the monster in your closet shrink into a cornered, desperate coward? Tell me in the comments. I need to know I am not the only one who felt the invisible leash snap. Because sitting on that floral sofa, staring at my dark phone screen, every ounce of my lifelong fear simply evaporates. The suffocating anxiety that dictated my posture, my career choices, and my relationships dissolves into the warm air. Sylvia locked me out in the freezing rain to assert her dominance. She intended to break my spirit, to remind me that my existence was a conditional privilege she could revoke at any time. Instead, her punishment led me straight to the vault of her darkest felony. She is not a savior. She is not a strict but loving matriarch. She is a criminal who stole a child to decorate her perfect suburban life. Beside me, Clara stands up. The movement is fluid, lacking the unsteady tremor that buckled her knees on the front porch. She reaches up and wipes the remaining moisture from her cheeks using the sleeve of her dark green sweater. When she lowers her arm, her posture is entirely different. Her spine is straight, her shoulders are squared. The crushing, agonizing grief of a mourning mother is gone, replaced by the terrifying, focused resolve of a woman preparing for war. Aunt Diane steps forward from the kitchen threshold, wringing the flour-dusted dish towel in her hands. Her eyes dart nervously from the scattered files on the coffee table to Clara's hardened expression. "Clara, you need to think about this," Diane whispers, her voice tight with apprehension. Richard Jordan is a senior partner at one of the biggest law firms in the state. He has judges on speed dial. They have endless money. If you confront them without a lawyer, they will find a way to twist this. They will crush you again. I look at Aunt Diane, recognizing the pragmatic fear of a working-class woman accustomed to the wealthy rewriting the rules. She is right to be cautious. Richard destroys lives for a living. He negotiates corporate settlements that bankrupt entire communities. If we give him time to strategize, he will deploy a team of ruthless defense attorneys. He will file injunctions. He will bury the evidence under a mountain of procedural delays. But Clara shakes her head. She walks over to the coffee table and begins gathering the documents. Her hands move with deliberate, methodical precision. "They do not get another day," Clara says, her tone slicing through the room like a cold blade. They do not get another hour. They had 28 years to hire lawyers and build their fortress. Today, I have my daughter. She picks up the yellowed birth certificate, tracing my true name with her thumb before sliding it into the manila envelope. She picks up the private investigator reports, the photographs, and the falsified death record bearing Richard's signature. Each piece of paper is a weapon, and she is loading them into the thin cardboard pouch with the steady hands of a soldier. I watch her pack the files, and a new wave of adrenaline surges through my veins. Aunt Diane is worried about Richard's legal connections, but I know Sylvia's true vulnerability. I know the one thing she values more than her husband's bank account or her expansive real estate portfolio: her audience. Sylvia's annual Thanksgiving dinner is not a private family gathering. It is a highly choreographed social gala. She spends months curating the guest list, ensuring the perfect ratio of influential community leaders, hospital board members, and elite country club associates. Uncle David is not just an uncle, he is a sitting appellate court judge. Aunt Martha is the chairwoman of the local philanthropic society. Sylvia hosts this dinner to showcase her flawless life, using my sister Chloe and me as polished props to demonstrate her superior parenting. Her reputation is her actual child. The people sitting in that dining room right now are the foundation of her entire identity. If we expose her in a private courtroom, she will spin the narrative. She will tell her friends it was a misunderstanding, a medical clerical error she and Richard valiantly tried to correct. She will play the victim. The only way to destroy a narcissist is to dismantle their facade in front of the very audience they rely on for validation. Clara seals the metal clasp on the manila envelope. She turns to me, holding the thick package against her chest. Her hazel eyes lock onto mine, searching for any sign of hesitation. She knows what she is asking. She is asking me to walk back into the lion's den. She is asking me to burn down the only family structure I have ever known. I think about my sister Chloe, sitting at that mahogany table, pouring expensive wine and laughing. Chloe grew up believing our mother was a saint. Chloe received the new cars, the paid tuition, the unconditional praise. She does not know her entire privileged existence was funded by the architects of a kidnapping. A pang of sorrow hits my chest for the sister who is about to lose everything she believes in. But protecting Chloe's illusion means protecting Sylvia's crime. The truth has a price, and it is time for the Jordan family to pay it. I stand up from the floral sofa. My legs are steady. The freezing drive out here drained my physical energy, but the righteous anger burning in my chest provides a fierce, renewable fuel. "Grab your coat," Clara says, her voice low and steady. She walks past Aunt Diane and heads straight for the front entryway. She pulls a heavy wool peacoat from a brass hook and slides it over her shoulders. She reaches into a ceramic bowl on the console table and pulls out a ring of keys. She turns back to face me, tossing the keys through the air. I catch the metal ring in my palm. The jagged edges press into my skin. "Where are we going?" I ask. My voice is calm. I already know the answer. My blood is rushing, drumming a frantic, anticipatory beat against my eardrums. I can feel the momentum of the universe shifting, redirecting a 28-year trajectory of lies toward a singular, explosive destination. Clara pulls open the heavy wooden front door. The freezing November wind howls across the porch, but neither of us flinches. She steps out into the amber light, the rain misting against her dark hair. She looks back at me, her face illuminated by the glow of the porch bulb, her expression carved from stone. "Sylvia wanted you at Thanksgiving dinner," Clara says, stepping down into the storm. We are going to Thanksgiving dinner. The drive back takes 40 minutes. The dashboard clock glows green in the dark cabin, tracking the slow passage of time. The tires slice through the standing water on Interstate 5, sending a steady spray against the undercarriage. Beside me, Clara sits in the passenger seat. The silence between us is thick, but it carries no hesitation. It is a tactical quiet. We are two soldiers riding toward the front line. The heater vents blow dry air across my knuckles, but my skin remains ice cold. Resting on the center console, right between us, is the manila envelope. The paper holds a radioactive truth. My mind drifts to the dining room waiting for us. I picture my younger sister, Chloe. Sylvia birthed Chloe 2 years after she stole me. From the moment Chloe could walk, the dividing line in our household was drawn with permanent ink. Chloe was the biological heir, the golden child bathed in unearned praise. When Chloe turned 16, she walked out to the driveway to find a brand new silver convertible wrapped in a giant red bow. When I turned 16, Sylvia handed me a bus schedule and a lecture about the rising cost of my teenage appetite. Chloe attended an elite private university, her tuition paid in full before she even unpacked her dorm room. I worked 30 hours a week waiting tables to fund my state college degree, constantly reminded by Richard that I should be grateful they allowed me to live under their roof during high school. I was an indentured servant paying off a debt that did not exist. I was the living, breathing charity receipt Sylvia paraded around her country club. But here is the tragic part. Chloe does not know. My sister sits in that warm dining room right now, sipping expensive wine, believing our mother is a paragon of virtue. Chloe thinks Sylvia rescued a discarded orphan out of the goodness of her heart. What happens to a person when they discover their entire privileged life was subsidized by a kidnapping? What happens when Chloe realizes the mother she worships is a felon? I feel a brief, sharp pang of sorrow for the girl who is about to lose everything. But keeping Chloe comfortable means keeping Clara in the dark. The time for protecting the Jordan family illusions is over. Then there is the audience, the aunts, the uncles, the cousins. Uncle David sits at the table tonight cutting his turkey, confident in his status as an appellate court judge. Aunt Martha is likely regaling the table with stories from her philanthropic board meetings. They are the architects of Sylvia's social empire. They validate her. They applaud her flawless aesthetic and her supposed generosity. Tonight, I am bringing the wrecking ball to their polite, sanitized world. I am going to force them to look at the human cost of Sylvia's perfection. We exit the highway. The landscape shifts back to the opulent reality I left behind earlier this evening. The narrow, cracked sidewalks of Clara's neighborhood are replaced by wide, sweeping avenues lined with manicured oak trees. The streetlights here mimic antique gas lamps, casting a cold, white glow over the pristine lawns. The rain continues to fall, slicking the dark asphalt. Every house we pass sits far back from the road, guarded by imposing brick walls and wrought iron gates. Wealth creates a very specific type of silence. It is a quiet designed to keep the rest of the world out. I turn the steering wheel, guiding the Honda onto Sylvia's street. Her sprawling colonial estate looms at the end of the cul-de-sac. The house is illuminated like a medieval fortress. Spotlights shine upward against the white brick facade. The expansive front windows glow with golden light, putting the elegant Thanksgiving gathering on full display for anyone passing by. It is a museum exhibit of the perfect American family. The long, sweeping driveway is packed with luxury vehicles. Uncle David's black sedan sits near the manicured hedges. Aunt Martha's polished SUV takes up a spot near the garage. And parked right by the front walkway, gleaming even in the rain, is Sylvia's pristine white Mercedes. It is her prized possession. Normally, visitors are expected to park on the street to avoid blocking her precious car. I do not park on the street. I press the accelerator, guiding my beat-up 10-year-old Honda right onto the immaculate paving stones. I pull up mere inches from the rear bumper of the Mercedes. I shift into park, boxing her in. There is no escape route. The physical blockade mirrors the trap we are about to spring inside. I turn the key in the ignition. The steady hum of the four-cylinder engine dies, leaving the cabin in profound stillness. The windshield wipers freeze mid-swipe. The rain drums a relentless rhythm against the roof. I turn my head and look at Clara. She is staring at the sprawling colonial house. Her jaw is set tight. Her hazel eyes reflect the golden light spilling from the dining room windows. She does not look intimidated by the wealth or the imposing architecture. She looks ready. She turns her gaze to me and delivers a single, firm nod. I push the car door open. The freezing November air bites at my cheeks, a stark contrast to the heated cabin. We step out into the storm simultaneously. I reach into the deep pocket of my wool coat. My fingers brush past a crumpled receipt and find the cold, heavy metal I am looking for. It is a brass key on a simple metal ring. When Sylvia sent me that text message earlier, gloating about throwing the deadbolt, she made a critical, arrogant miscalculation. She assumed her authority was the only key required to keep me out. She forgot that 3 years ago, during a 2-week vacation to Europe, Richard handed me the master key to the estate so I could feed their purebred spaniel. I never gave it back. They never asked for it. They considered me too insignificant to pose a security threat. My fingers wrap tightly around the brass ridges. The cold metal grounds me. I look over the roof of the Honda. Clara is standing on the passenger side, the manila envelope tucked securely under her arm, shielded from the rain by her heavy pea coat. We walk toward the front steps together. The rain soaks our hair, but neither of us rushes. The pace is deliberate. Every step on the wet concrete is a countdown. The golden light from the frosted glass door spills across our boots. Sylvia wanted me to wait on this porch. She wanted me to shiver in the dark until I learned my place. I am not waiting anymore. I stand on the covered landing of the colonial estate, the freezing Seattle rain lashing relentlessly against my back. Through the decorative frosted glass panel of the heavy oak door, the golden glow of the foyer chandelier beckons. It is a false beacon of warmth, representing a sanctuary that always came with impossible conditions. My fingers are stiff, numb from the cold, and trembling slightly as I align the serrated brass key with the lock. For years, this door served as an impenetrable fortress. It was the physical boundary between Sylvia's conditional acceptance and the bitter reality of my failure to meet her exacting standards. She locked it tonight to break my spirit. She locked it to remind me that my existence in her world was a fragile privilege she could revoke at her whim. I slide the cold metal into the lock mechanism. I grip the round brass knob and turn my wrist. The heavy internal deadbolt yields with a sharp, distinct metallic click. The sound is tiny, yet it echoes in my chest like a gunshot. It is the sound of a 28-year barrier shattering. I push the thick oak door open. It swings inward on silent, oiled hinges, welcoming the violent autumn storm into the immaculate sanctuary of the Jordan family. The temperature difference hits my freezing skin instantly. A rush of heated air wraps around my damp clothes, carrying the rich, savory scent of roasted turkey, sage stuffing, and expensive Cabernet Sauvignon. It is the signature fragrance of a high society holiday gathering, underscored by the faint, sterile scent of lemon furniture polish. I step over the threshold. Clara follows right behind me, her presence a quiet, grounding force at my back. Neither of us pauses to wipe our boots on the monogrammed welcome mat. We step directly onto the imported Persian rug covering the vast expanse of the foyer floor. The wet soles of our boots leave dark, muddy tracks across the intricate silk-woven patterns. Puddles of rainwater drip from the hem of my coat, soaking into the expensive fibers. It is a deliberate desecration of Sylvia's flawless environment. It is a physical manifestation of the ugly, unvarnished truth we are bringing into her carefully curated world. Down the wide hallway, the dining room is alive with joyous, affluent noise. The acoustics of the high vaulted ceilings carry every word, every clink of silver down the corridor. I hear Uncle David holding court. He is an appellate judge, a man who loves the sound of his own voice and demands undivided attention. He reaches the punchline of a long, winding anecdote about an exclusive charity golf tournament. A chorus of polite, synchronized laughter erupts from the dining room. It is the practiced, harmonious chuckle of 30 wealthy relatives eager to flatter the most influential man at the table. I begin walking down the polished oak hallway. The muddy water squelches softly beneath my heels with every step. Beside me, Clara moves with silent determination. Her heavy wool peacoat drips rainwater onto the floorboards. I glance at her profile in the dim hallway light. She is staring straight ahead, her jaw locked tight, her hazel eyes fixed on the glowing, arched doorway at the end of the corridor. She is walking toward the ghost of her stolen youth. She is walking into a room full of strangers who benefited from her agonizing grief. My heart hammers a frantic, bruising rhythm against my ribs, but my steps remain steady. I think about the people sitting around that mahogany table. Aunt Martha, Cousin Sarah, Uncle David. They spent my entire childhood treating me like a fragile, slightly defective charity project. They whispered behind their hands at family reunions, praising Sylvia for taking in a troubled orphan with bad genetics. They built a towering pedestal for my adoptive mother, using my fabricated misery as the foundation for her saintly reputation. Tonight, I am kicking that pedestal out from under her. I reach the edge of the arched doorway. The brilliant light from the dining room chandelier pours out onto the hallway floor, drawing a sharp line between the dark corridor and the glittering spectacle inside. I take one final breath of the lemon-scented air and step into the frame. The transition is instantaneous and staggering. 1 second, the room is filled with comfortable, wealthy noise. The delicate ringing of silver forks scraping against fine bone china, the glug of expensive wine pouring into crystal goblets, the lingering chuckles from the golf joke. The next second, the laughter dies. It does not fade gradually. It is extinguished in a fraction of a heartbeat, as if someone pulled the main power cord on a stereo system. 30 pairs of eyes snap toward the doorway. The visual spread before me is blinding in its perfection. The long table stretches across the room, draped in crisp Irish linen. Tall taper candles flicker in silver holders, casting a warm, flattering glow over the faces of my extended family. My sister Chloe is standing near a mahogany buffet cabinet, holding an open bottle of Pinot Noir, her mouth slightly open in shock. My father, Richard, sits near the far end of the table. His head jerks up, his wine glass hovering frozen just inches from his lips. And sitting at the head of the table, presiding over her empire, is Sylvia. She wears a tailored emerald silk blouse. Her blonde hair is styled in an immaculate, unmoving sweep. When her eyes land on me, standing in her pristine doorway, dripping muddy water onto her floors, a flash of pure, unadulterated fury ignites in her pupils. But she does not break character. She is the consummate performer, and she has a captive audience of 30 people watching her every move. She assumes I have crawled back to surrender. She thinks the freezing rain and the locked door broke my rebellious spirit, forcing me to return and beg for readmission to the family. She sets her crystal wine glass down on the linen cloth. The delicate clink echoes loudly in the silent room. She straightens her spine, adopting the posture of a disappointed but firm matriarch dealing with an unruly teenager. "Harper," she says loudly. Her voice projects across the dining room, sharp and theatrical, calibrated to ensure every single person at the table hears her reprimand. "I told you that you were locked out until you learned some respect. You do not just barge into my home trailing mud like a stray animal. This is a private family dinner, and your petulant tantrum has gone on long enough." She waits for my reaction. She expects me to lower my head, to mumble a pathetic apology, to submit to her public humiliation. The relatives watch me with varying expressions of pity and deep discomfort. They are waiting for the prodigal charity case to grovel before the generous queen. I do not lower my head. I do not speak. I look directly into Sylvia's eyes. I hold her furious gaze, letting the heavy silence stretch for 5 agonizing seconds. Then, I take one deliberate step to my left. I clear the center of the arched doorway. The brilliant light from the dining room chandelier spills past me, illuminating the dark hallway behind. Clara steps forward. She walks out of the shadows and steps directly into the center of the frame, standing shoulder to shoulder with me. She wears her damp peacoat. Her auburn hair hangs wet around her face. Her hazel eyes lock onto the woman sitting at the head of the table. The impact of Clara's physical presence hits the room like a concussive shockwave. Standing next to each other in the bright light, the undeniable biology is glaring. We share the same sharp, prominent cheekbones. We share the same dark auburn hair, a stark and sudden contrast to the sea of fair-haired Jordan relatives sitting around the table. But it is our eyes that seal the terrifying truth. Two identical pairs of hazel eyes, flecked with gold, staring down the woman who tore us apart. The resemblance is not just striking. It is forensic. I watch the faces of the extended family process the impossible image. Uncle David stops chewing his dinner roll, his jaw going slack. Aunt Martha lowers her silver fork to her plate, her brow furrowing in deep, unsettled confusion. Chloe looks from me to Clara and back to me. The wine bottle in my sister's trembling hand tilts dangerously close to spilling over the white tablecloth. They do not know who this stranger is yet, but their primal instincts recognize the terrifying, undeniable reflection standing beside me. The silence that follows is profound. It is not the polite quiet of a paused conversation. It is a suffocating, ringing void. It is the sound of a carefully constructed reality beginning to fracture under the weight of an impossible truth. The air in the dining room turns brittle and cold. No one breathes, no one moves. Even the flickering flames of the taper candles seem to freeze in place. I look back at Sylvia. The theatrical arrogance that coated her face just moments ago vanishes, replaced by a raw, naked terror. She is trapped at the head of her own table, surrounded by the influential audience she spent her life cultivating, staring at the living, breathing evidence of her darkest crime. The suffocating silence holding the dining room hostage shatters the moment Sylvia decides to pivot. I watch her recalculate in real time. The raw terror that initially paralyzed her features is swiftly shoved down, replaced by a chilling, practiced composure. For decades, Sylvia has treated truth as a malleable substance, something she could bend and shape to fit her immaculate aesthetic. When confronted with reality, her instinct is never to confess. Her instinct is to rewrite the script and discredit the messenger. She stands up slowly from the head of the table. Her posture is impossibly straight, projecting the serene authority of a benevolent monarch handling a peasant uprising. Her manicured hands glide down the front of her emerald silk blouse, smoothing away imaginary wrinkles. She tilts her chin upward, painting a look of profound, condescending pity across her face. It is a performance I have endured countless times. Whenever I tried to express a genuine emotion or point out her cruelty during my childhood, she would deploy this exact expression, making me feel as though my grip on reality was slipping. "I do not know who this poor woman is, Harper," Sylvia says. Her voice rings out, clear and steady, laced with a cloying, manufactured sorrow. She addresses me, but her words are meant for the 30 relatives sitting in captive silence. She is broadcasting her narrative. "But bringing a stranger to disrupt our family dinner is unhinged," she continues, shaking her head softly. "I knew you were struggling with your gratitude, but this stunt crosses a line. You are unwell, Harper. You need psychiatric help. We can discuss finding you a residential facility in the morning, but right now, you need to ask your friend to leave so we can finish our holiday." She finishes her decree and looks toward Uncle David, anticipating the familiar nod of validation. She expects the appellate judge to agree, to murmur something about my unfortunate genetics finally manifesting into a mental breakdown. She waits for the rest of the table to fall into line behind their matriarch, securing her perimeter against the threat Clara and I pose. But the validation never comes. Uncle David does not nod. Aunt Martha does not murmur in agreement. Nobody looks at Sylvia. Instead, 30 pairs of eyes are fixed on the opposite end of the long mahogany table. I follow their collective gaze and look at my adoptive father. Richard has stood up from his chair. The transition from a powerful corporate attorney to a hollow shell of a man has happened in a matter of seconds. All the blood has fled his face, leaving his skin an ashen, translucent gray. He looks like a corpse that has somehow managed to prop itself upright. He is staring directly at Clara, his eyes wide, his pupils dilated with the horrific realization that the past he buried has just walked through his front door. Richard is the man who drafted the legal framework of this kidnapping. He is the mastermind who weaponized medical privacy laws and forged state documents to steal an infant from an unconscious teenager. He spent his entire career evaluating risk, calculating liabilities, and ensuring his own pristine reputation remained untarnished. He built an invisible fortress around his crime, assuming the poverty of his victim would guarantee her permanent silence. Looking at Clara standing in the bright light of his dining room, the fortress crumbles to dust. His hand begins to tremble. It is a severe, uncontrollable tremor that travels up his arm. He is holding a crystal goblet filled with expensive Pinot Noir. His fingers spasm, losing their grip on the delicate stem. The glass slips. It plummets toward the hardwood floor, striking the edge of the imported Persian rug. The crystal shatters into 100 glittering shards. The dark red wine erupts outward, bleeding into the intricate silk fibers like a fresh crime scene. The sudden crash causes several relatives to flinch, but Richard does not even blink. He does not look down at the ruined rug. He remains locked onto Clara, his lips parting as his throat works to push out a single, devastating sound. "Clara," Richard whispers. The name drops into the quiet dining room like a live grenade. It is barely audible, yet it carries the destructive force of a confession. By speaking her name, Richard annihilates Sylvia's entire defense. He confirms this woman is no stranger. He validates my sanity. He admits to the history standing in his foyer. A sharp, metallic clatter pierces the tension. Somewhere down the table, a silver fork slips from Cousin Sarah's numb fingers, striking a porcelain plate. The noise is jarring, pulling my sister out of her shock. Chloe turns her head, looking frantically between Richard and Sylvia. The golden child, the biological daughter who grew up enveloped in a bubble of unearned privilege and orchestrated lies, is trying to solve a puzzle with terrifying missing pieces. Her pristine world is collapsing around her, and she can feel the tremors shaking the foundation. "Dad," Chloe says, her voice cracking, pleading for an explanation that will make the nightmare stop. "Who is Clara?" Richard cannot answer her. He just stares at the spreading stain of wine on his expensive rug, his chest heaving as he struggles to draw oxygen into his lungs. Beside me, Clara decides the time for waiting is over. She steps past the threshold, leaving my side. Her wet boots leave dark, distinct footprints on the polished oak floorboards. She walks with a terrifying, unhurried grace. She does not scream at the people who stole her youth. She does not hurl insults or flip the beautifully set table. Her composure is far more lethal than any outburst could ever be. She moves with the cold, precise certainty of a woman executing a long overdue judgment. She stops right next to Richard's empty chair. The relatives seated nearby instinctively lean back, pressing their spines against the dining chairs, trying to put distance between themselves and the incoming blast radius. Clara unwinds the metal clasp on the damp manila envelope. She reaches inside, pulling out the stack of documents she organized back at her modest blue house. She extracts the yellowed birth certificate. She pulls out the private investigator reports, complete with the faded photographs of her grieving teenage self. Finally, she retrieves the photocopy of the forged death certificate. She places the papers directly onto the center of the Irish linen tablecloth, right next to a silver gravy boat and a platter of roasted vegetables. The stark, clinical reality of the state documents provides a jarring contrast to the opulent holiday feast. The typed ink, the official seals, and the damning signatures sit under the bright chandelier, demanding to be read. Clara leaves her hand resting on top of the pile for a moment, pressing her palm against the evidence of her survival. She looks down the length of the table, bypassing Richard, bypassing the terrified relatives, until her hazel eyes lock onto Sylvia. "I am the mother of the child your parents stole," Clara says. Her voice is terrifyingly calm. It does not shake. It does not rise in pitch. It is a steady, undeniable declaration of fact that slices through the remaining illusions of the Jordan family. The words hang in the air, thick and heavy, waiting for the audience to digest the magnitude of the crime. I watch Sylvia grip the back of her dining chair. Her knuckles turn white. The veins in her neck bulge against her silk collar. She is out of moves. The gaslighting failed. The enabler confessed. The evidence is sitting on the table. The pristine, aristocratic life she built is burning to the ground, and she has nowhere left to run. The room fractures into a dozen silent, jagged pieces. The forged death certificate rests on the crisp Irish linen tablecloth, bathed in the warm glow of the crystal chandelier. It sits inches away from a silver gravy boat and a platter of roasted root vegetables, a stark, clinical intrusion of reality invading the curated opulence of the holiday feast. For a long, agonizing moment, no one breathes. The guests are trapped in a collective state of suspended animation, their affluent sensibilities paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the accusation hovering in the lemon-scented air. My Aunt Diane, the older sister of my adoptive father, is the first to break the spell. She sits halfway down the long mahogany table, her posture normally rigid with practiced aristocratic grace. Now her shoulders slump forward. Her manicured hand, adorned with a heavy diamond anniversary ring, trembles visibly as she reaches out over her china plate. Her fingertips brush the edge of the yellowed paper. She drags the stack of documents closer to her chest, the friction of the pages scraping against the textured linen, producing a harsh, dry whisper. Diane lowers her gaze to the top sheet. She reads the typed ink. She studies the seal of the medical examiner. Then her eyes trace the looping, precise cursive signature at the very bottom of the page, the signature belonging to her own brother. A sharp, horrified intake of breath escapes Diane. It is a ragged gasp, the sound of a woman inhaling toxic smoke. She drops the paper as if it burned her skin. She snaps her head upward, her wide, terrified eyes locking onto the hollow shell of the man sitting at the opposite end of the dining room. "Richard, what is this?" Diane asks. Her voice cracks on the final syllable. It is not a question seeking clarification. It is a desperate plea for a denial that will never come. Richard does not look at his sister. He remains transfixed by the dark stain of spilled Pinot Noir soaking into the expensive Persian rug beneath his ruined crystal goblet. His inability to defend himself serves as the ultimate damning confirmation. Clara does not wait for the wealthy spectators to draw their own conclusions. She steps into the suffocating quiet, claiming the floor with the steady, unyielding authority of a survivor. "I was 19 years old," Clara says, addressing the sea of pale, shocked faces. "I went into premature labor. I had no insurance. I had no money. When I woke up from a 3-day medical coma, the woman sitting at the head of your table was waiting by my hospital bed." Clara extends a single finger pointing directly at Sylvia. "She held my hand," Clara continues, her tone dropping in temperature, becoming a cold, precise instrument of truth. "She manufactured tears. She told me my newborn daughter suffered a fatal heart defect. She claimed the infant passed away in the neonatal unit. When I begged to see the body, she invoked strict hospital health regulations. She told me the state had already assumed custody of the remains to handle the burial because I could not afford the morgue fees. She used her administrative authority to build an impenetrable wall of bureaucracy around a grieving teenager." The dining room absorbs the horrific narrative. Uncle David, the esteemed appellate court judge, reaches into his breast pocket and pulls out his reading glasses. He slides them onto his nose, leaning his substantial frame over the table to inspect the documents Diane abandoned. His legal mind goes to work, scanning the dates, the hospital letterhead, and the forged authorization forms. I watch his jaw tighten. He recognizes the undeniable structure of a coordinated felony: fraud, forgery, kidnapping. The statute of limitations offers no protection for an ongoing, continuous crime of this unprecedented scale. The relatives begin to physically recoil. The synchronized shifting of heavy wooden chairs echoes down the length of the table. Aunts, uncles, and cousins press their spines against the ornate upholstery, pulling their bodies away from their porcelain plates, away from the evidence, and, most tellingly, away from Sylvia. The invisible pedestal they spent decades building for their saintly matriarch disintegrates into dust. Sylvia senses the shift. She feels her audience slipping out of her grasp. The pristine, untouchable facade she wore for nearly 3 decades cracks, exposing the frantic, cornered predator underneath. She grips the curved wooden back of her dining chair. She squeezes the polished timber so hard her knuckles turn bone white, the blood fleeing her fingertips. Her chest heaves beneath the tailored emerald silk. The flawless composure she wielded as a weapon her entire life finally shatters. "It is a lie," Sylvia shrieks. Her voice loses its melodic, theatrical cadence. It turns shrill, desperate, and terrifyingly raw. She glares at the retreating relatives, her eyes darting from Uncle David to Aunt Diane, begging them to maintain their blind loyalty. "You cannot believe this nonsense," Sylvia continues, her pitch rising higher. "She was an unfit mother. She was a child herself, living in a squalid little apartment working for minimum wage. What kind of future could she possibly provide? I gave Harper a better life. I saved her from a miserable existence." The echo of her shrieking defense bounces off the vaulted ceilings and rains down upon the silent guests. She did not deny the act. She justified it. The confession hangs over the table, a heavy, suffocating blanket of guilt. Sylvia did not say the documents were fake. She did not claim Clara was mistaken. She admitted to the theft, wrapping her sinister crime in the self-righteous delusion of a rescue mission. She believed her immense wealth granted her the divine right to evaluate another woman's worth and harvest her child. Near the mahogany buffet cabinet, the clunk of a heavy glass bottle, breaking the silence, draws my attention. My sister Chloe sets the open bottle of wine down on the polished wood. Her hands are shaking so severely she can no longer hold the glass cylinder. The golden child, the biological daughter raised in an incubator of extreme privilege, takes a slow, unsteady step forward. Her pristine world is currently burning to ash, the smoke stinging her eyes. "You faked a baby's death," Chloe whispers. Tears spill over her eyelashes, ruining her flawless makeup, carving dark tracks down her pale cheeks. She stares at the woman she idolized, the mother she believed was the epitome of grace and charity. "You let me grow up thinking Harper was an unwanted orphan," Chloe says, her voice trembling with undisguised horror. "You made me believe we were doing her a favor. Every time you grounded her, every time you told her she owed us, you were punishing someone you stole." Sylvia opens her mouth to pacify her biological daughter, reaching a frantic hand out toward the buffet. "Chloe, darling, you do not understand the complexities of the situation." "Do not touch me," Chloe snaps, taking a rapid step backward, dodging the outstretched hand as if avoiding a venomous snake. The rejection from her favored child is the final blow to the crumbling empire. At the far end of the table, Richard finally surrenders to the gravity of his sins. The high-powered attorney sinks lower into his chair. He brings both hands up, burying his face in his palms. A low, wretched sound emanates from his chest. It is a deep, agonizing sob. The enabler, the man who drafted the legal blueprints of this tragedy, is crushed by the sheer weight of a 28-year-old felony. He weeps into his hands, mourning the loss of his career, his reputation, and his freedom. I stand near the arched doorway, the damp wool of my coat chilling my skin, watching the destruction of the only family structure I ever knew. There is no joy in this victory. There is no triumphant vindication. There is only a profound, exhausting sadness. witnessing the ugly reality behind the polished silver and the expensive wine. Sylvia realizes the battle is lost. Her husband is weeping. Her biological daughter looks at her with revulsion. Her influential relatives are staring at her as if she is a monster wearing a human mask. The audience is gone. With nothing left to protect, Sylvia turns her crosshairs onto me. She abandons the weeping Richard and the horrified Chloe. She locks her furious, unhinged gaze onto my face. Tears of pure, venomous rage pool in the corners of her eyes, spilling over her cheekbones. The emerald silk of her blouse trembles with the force of her unregulated anger. "I raised you," Sylvia screams, her voice tearing at her vocal cords. "I clothed you. I fed you. I gave you an education. You were nothing. I built you from the ground up. You owe me everything." She points a shaking, manicured finger directly at my chest, preparing to unleash 3 decades of pent-up, narcissistic fury. Sylvia stands at the head of the ruined table, her manicured finger pointing directly at my chest. Her chest heaves under the emerald silk of her blouse. She demands gratitude. She demands repayment for the food I ate, the clothes I wore, and the roof she provided. For 28 years, that specific tone of voice triggered a conditioned, inescapable panic within me. It was the frequency of my subjugation. It meant I had stepped out of line and needed to shrink myself back down to survive. I look at her outstretched finger. I look at the tears of rage spilling over her cheekbones. I feel nothing but a cold, sterile pity. The invisible leash that tethered me to her approval has snapped. I do not owe you a single breath, I say. My voice is not loud. It does not echo off the vaulted ceilings or rival her hysterical pitch. It is quiet, steady, and terrifyingly calm. It is the sound of a prisoner handing the keys back to the warden and walking out the open gate. Aunt Diane sits halfway down the length of the mahogany table. She processes my words, and then she processes the forged death certificate resting on the Irish linen mere inches from her plate. Diane is the social barometer of the extended family, a woman who navigates the affluent circles of Seattle with practiced, effortless grace. She understands the currency of reputation better than anyone. Diane places her linen napkin onto the table. It covers a portion of her untouched sweet potato casserole. She reaches down and picks up her leather purse from the floorboards. She turns to her husband, placing a trembling hand on his shoulder. "Let us go," Diane whispers. She does not say a word to Sylvia. She does not offer a reprimand or demand a further explanation. The silence is infinitely more punishing than any screaming match could ever be. Diane pushes her heavy wooden chair back. The wooden legs scrape against the polished oak floorboards. The sound is harsh and grating, slicing through the tension like a physical blade. Diane and her husband stand. They turn their backs on the head of the table. They walk toward the arched doorway, passing right by Clara and me. Diane keeps her eyes focused firmly on the hallway, refusing to cast even a fleeting glance toward the woman she called her sister-in-law for 3 decades. The departure of Richard's sister acts as a catalyst. It breaks the paralyzing spell holding the rest of the dining room captive. Uncle David is next. He's the appellate court judge, a man who has spent his entire professional life evaluating evidence and handing down verdicts. His legal mind has already calculated the blast radius of the documents sitting on the table. He knows that proximity to a federal crime of this magnitude is professional poison. He cannot be associated with kidnapping or medical fraud. His pristine reputation depends on a swift, decisive exit. David stands up. He tosses his napkin onto his plate, the fabric landing in a small pool of brown gravy. He buttons his suit jacket with mechanical precision. He signals to his wife, Aunt Martha. Martha looks terrified, her eyes darting between the door and the ruined matriarch, but she obeys her husband. They push their chairs back in unison. The synchronized scraping of the wooden legs sounds like the tolling of a heavy bell. They march toward the doorway, their heads bowed, joining the exodus. Then Cousin Sarah stands, then Uncle Robert. There is no shouting. There is no debate over the authenticity of the paperwork. It is the devastating collective realization of an entire family recognizing they are sharing a holiday meal with a monster. They have spent years eating her food, drinking her wine, and validating her delusions of grandeur, oblivious to the staggering human cost funding her perfect life. One by one, 30 chairs are pushed back from the sprawling table. The noise becomes a cacophony of scraping wood and shuffling leather shoes. The relatives move with a frantic, suppressed urgency. They want to escape the burning building before the smoke ruins their clothes. Sylvia watches her empire disintegrate. She drops her pointing finger. Her mouth falls open, attempting to form words that refuse to materialize. "David," Sylvia gasps, reaching a hand toward the judge as he passes her chair. "Please, you must understand, Uncle David does not break his stride." He walks past Sylvia as if she is entirely invisible. He steps into the hallway, heading straight for the coat closet. The foyer becomes a chaotic bottleneck of fleeing guests. I hear the rustling of heavy winter coats being dragged off brass hooks. The heavy oak front door opens, letting the freezing November storm sweep into the warm house. A cold draft rushes down the corridor, fluttering the flames of the taper candles in the dining room. The door slams shut, then opens again, and then slams again. The sound repeats like a metronome, counting down the final seconds of Sylvia's reign. Within 3 minutes, the grand dining room is stripped of its audience. Only one guest remains standing near the mahogany buffet cabinet, my sister, Chloe. She is gripping her wool coat against her chest like a protective shield. Her mascara is smeared beneath her eyes, ruined by the steady stream of tears carving tracks down her pale cheeks. She looks at Richard, who is still slumped in his chair with his face buried in his hands. Then she looks at Sylvia. Sylvia turns her desperate gaze to her biological daughter. The loss of the extended family is a severe blow, but losing the golden child is the ultimate defeat. "Chloe, darling," Sylvia whispers, taking a hesitant step toward the buffet. "You know I love you. Everything I did to build a perfect home for us." Chloe shakes her head, taking a rapid step backward. The revulsion on her face is vivid and raw. She realizes the luxury cars, the private university tuition, and the immaculate holidays were all subsidized by a staggering, unforgivable lie. The mother she worshipped is a fiction. "Do not call me darling," Chloe says. Her voice cracks, thick with grief. "I do not even know who you are." Chloe turns around. She does not walk toward the front door where the rest of the relatives fled. She pushes through the swinging wooden door that leads into the kitchen. The hinges squeak briefly before the door swings shut, cutting off the view. A few seconds later, I hear the heavy thud of the back patio door slamming closed. The biological loyalty is severed. Chloe is gone, stepping out into the dark, freezing rain to escape the toxicity of her own home. The dining room is now profoundly empty, save for Sylvia, Richard, Clara, and me. I survey the ruins of the spectacular Thanksgiving dinner. The long table is a graveyard of a fabricated life. Plates of half-eaten turkey sit growing cold. Expensive silverware rests at odd, abandoned angles. The shattered crystal wine glass on the floor remains untouched, the dark red stain soaking deeper into the fibers of the Persian rug. The taper candles flicker, casting long, wavering shadows against the walls. Sylvia stands alone at the head of the table. Her hand is still suspended in the air, reaching toward the empty space where Chloe stood moments ago. The woman who ruled her household through fear and intimidation has nothing left to control. Fear requires an audience, a subject willing to bend to the threat. Without the adulation of her peers and the submission of her children, she is just a lonely woman standing in a messy room wearing an expensive silk blouse. The social execution is complete. The audience has rendered their verdict and abandoned the theater. Now the systemic execution must begin. Beside me, Clara reaches into the deep pocket of her damp wool peacoat. Her movements are steady, lacking any of the nervous tremors that plagued her earlier in the evening. She pulls out her cell phone. The bright screen illuminates her sharp cheekbones in the dim light of the hallway. She unlocks the device. She does not look at Sylvia or Richard. She keeps her hazel eyes fixed on the forged documents resting next to the gravy boat. Clara types 3 digits into the keypad. She taps the screen once more, activating the speakerphone function. She holds the device in the palm of her hand, letting the electronic ringing echo through the cavernous, silent dining room. The phone rings once. The sound is loud, sterile, and unforgiving. It rings twice. Richard lifts his head from his hands. His eyes are bloodshot, his face stained with tears. He hears the dial tone and realizes the point of no return has arrived. The corporate lawyer knows exactly what happens next, and he has no legal maneuvers left to stop it. A click sounds from the phone speaker, followed by the crisp, professional voice of an emergency dispatcher. 911, what is your emergency? The dispatcher's voice grounds the high society drama in cold, hard, American reality. It is the sound of the outside world breaking down the walls of the Jordan estate. Clara takes a slow, deep breath. She looks right at Richard, holding his terrified gaze, ensuring he witnesses the exact moment his life unravels. I need to report a kidnapping, Clara says, her voice echoing clearly off the dining room walls. And massive medical fraud. The emergency dispatcher promises patrol units are en route. Clara ends the call and slips the device back into her peacoat pocket. We do not stay in the dining room to watch the wreckage smolder. We turn our backs on the head of the table and retrace our muddy footprints down the grand hallway, stepping out into the freezing Seattle night. The heavy oak door clicks shut behind us, sealing the perpetrators inside their self-made tomb. The rain has slowed to a steady, biting drizzle. We stand on the covered landing, waiting in the shadows. I wrap my arms around my waist, fighting the tremor in my shoulders. It is not just the cold causing me to shake, it is the adrenaline leaving my bloodstream, replaced by the staggering realization of what we have just set into motion. The interpersonal battle is over. The systemic reckoning has begun. I glance through the large bay window spanning the front of the colonial estate. The interior lights remain blazing, illuminating the high-definition drama unfolding inside. Richard is no longer weeping in his chair. Survival instincts have overridden his despair. He is pacing the length of the extravagant living room, his silk tie loosened, his cell phone pressed tight against his ear. His free hand runs frantically through his thinning hair. I can almost hear his frantic negotiations through the thick glass. He is calling elite defense attorneys, calling fixers, trying to construct a legal firewall before the authorities arrive. He spent his career exploiting loopholes for corporate clients, but there is no loophole for a fabricated death certificate bearing his signature. In stark contrast, Sylvia has not moved an inch. She remains seated at the head of the empty dining table. Her posture is rigid, her hands resting flat on the ruined Irish linen tablecloth. She is staring straight ahead at the opposite wall, her eyes vacant and unblinking. The pristine matriarch is trapped in a catatonic state, unable to process a reality where she is not the flawless victor. The crystal chandelier casts a harsh, unforgiving light on her emerald silk blouse, highlighting the stark isolation of her downfall. She is a queen sitting in an abandoned castle, waiting for the invading army to breach the gates. 10 minutes pass. Each second stretches into an agonizing eternity. Then, the distinct, high-pitched wail of sirens pierces the quiet suburban atmosphere. The sound originates from the highway exit and rapidly grows louder, echoing through the sprawling canopy of manicured oak trees. This exclusive neighborhood is designed to repel noise and disruption. Sirens do not belong here. They represent chaos, crime, and scandal, 3 things the residents pay exorbitant homeowner association fees to avoid. 2 police cruisers turn onto the affluent street, their tires hissing over the wet asphalt. The sirens cut out as they approach the cul-de-sac, but the light bars remain active. Brilliant flashes of red and blue strobe across the neighborhood. The sweeping beams reflect off the wet windshield of Sylvia's pristine white Mercedes. The colored lights dance across the white brick facade of the estate, casting erratic, frantic shadows over the porch where Clara and I stand. The visual disruption acts as a beacon. Across the street, the heavy mahogany door of the Stevenson residence swings open. Mr. Stevenson steps out onto his porch, pulling a velvet robe tight around his waist. 2 houses down, the glow of a porch light illuminates Mrs. Gable peering through her front gate. In this insulated enclave, reputation is the ultimate currency. Sylvia spent 3 decades carefully accumulating that currency, hosting charity galas and boasting about her perfect family. Tonight, the neighbors she sought to impress are standing in the rain, watching law enforcement descend upon her property. Her pristine social standing dies right there on the manicured lawn, bleeding out under the relentless strobe of police lights. The cruisers park at sharp angles, blocking the end of the driveway. 4 officers step out of their vehicles. They adjust their duty belts and utility vests, their expressions guarded and alert. They walk up the slippery concrete path, their heavy boots crunching over the fallen autumn leaves. The lead officer approaches the steps, his gaze shifting between Clara and me. "Are you the individuals who called dispatch regarding a kidnapping?" the officer asks, his tone skeptical but professional. Clara steps forward. The hesitation she carried earlier in the evening is gone. She is a mother handing over the weapon that will avenge her stolen youth. "Yes," Clara says, her voice steady and clear over the hum of the idling patrol cars. "I made the call. The people inside this house forged a death certificate 28 years ago and took my infant daughter." She pulls the manila envelope from under her coat. She unwinds the metal clasp and retrieves the documents, offering them to the officer. The policeman accepts the paperwork, pulling a small tactical flashlight from his belt. He clicks the beam on, illuminating the yellowed pages. He scans the original birth certificate, the private investigator reports, and finally, the photocopy of the state morgue transfer, authorizing the disposal of Lily Bennett. I watch the officer's demeanor shift in real time. The skepticism vanishes, replaced by a grim, hard realization. He recognizes the gravity of the paperwork. This is not a misunderstanding over custody. This is a severe, coordinated felony involving medical personnel. He lowers the flashlight and turns his attention to me. "And who are you, miss?" "I am Harper Jordan," I reply, swallowing the lump forming in my throat. The name feels foreign on my tongue, like an ill-fitting garment I am finally ready to discard. But according to the birth certificate you are holding, I am Lily Bennett. The people inside are the ones who raised me. They are Richard and Sylvia Jordan. The officer asks me a series of rapid, concise questions. I provide a brief statement confirming the timeline, the discovery of the hidden files in the bottom drawer, and Richard's signature on the paperwork. Every sentence I speak tightens the invisible noose around my adoptive parents. Explaining your own abduction to an armed stranger is a surreal, disorienting experience. The words sound like a true crime documentary, yet they describe the foundation of my entire existence. The lead officer nods, his jaw set tight. He turns to his partner, offering a brief, silent signal. 2 officers remain on the porch with us, while the other 2 unclip their radios and approach the front door. They do not knock politely. They grip the heavy brass handle, twist the latch, and push the door open, stepping past the threshold into the lemon-scented foyer. Through the frosted glass panel, I watch the dark silhouettes of the uniforms moving down the hallway. I see them enter the dining room. I cannot hear the dialogue, but the physical reactions are unmistakable. Richard drops his cell phone. He raises both hands in the air, surrendering to the inevitable. Sylvia finally breaks her catatonic freeze. She stands up, gesturing wildly, her silhouette shaking with indignant rage as an officer steps into her personal space, holding a pair of metal handcuffs. The empire is officially dismantled. The architects of my misery are being read their rights amidst the ruins of their holiday feast. I tear my eyes away from the window, unable to watch the final moments of their arrest. The cold wind whips across the landing, cutting through my wet clothes. A sudden, terrifying emptiness blooms in my chest. For 28 years, my identity was tethered to this house. Now the tether is severed, leaving me adrift in an unfamiliar reality. Then, I feel a warm, solid weight settle over my shoulders. Clara steps close to me. She wraps her arm around my shivering frame, pulling me against her side. The gesture is instinctual, protective, and profoundly comforting. I lean into her embrace, breathing in the scent of cinnamon apples and clean laundry detergent clinging to her sweater. It feels remarkably natural. It feels incredibly safe. It is the first time in my life I have experienced physical affection without an underlying condition or hidden agenda. "Let us go home, Lily," Clara says softly, resting her cheek against my damp hair. Hearing my true name spoken aloud sends a shockwave through my system. It is not whispered like a dark secret or read from a clinical state document. It is spoken with genuine, unconditional love. I turn my head and look at the imposing colonial estate one last time. I study the white brick, the tall columns, the perfectly symmetrical windows. This is the house where I was repeatedly told I was a chronic burden. This is the fortress where my teenage confidence was systematically dismantled, where I was labeled an ungrateful charity case whenever I failed to meet their impossible standards. This structure holds nothing but ghosts and stolen time. One of the officers assigned to wait with us pulls a notepad from his pocket. "Miss, we will need you to come down to the precinct tomorrow morning to provide a formal, recorded statement for the detectives. Are you heading to a secure location tonight?" I look at Clara. She offers an encouraging nod. "Yes," I tell the policeman, "I am going home." I reach into the deep pocket of my wool coat. My fingers brush against the cold, serrated edges of the brass house key, the master key Sylvia forgot to demand back. The tiny piece of metal that granted me access to the truth. I pull it out, holding it in my palm for a brief second, feeling its weight. I extend my hand toward the officer standing near the doorway. "I will not be needing this anymore," I say, dropping the key into his waiting hand. I turn my back on the Jordan estate. Clara and I walk down the wet concrete path together, leaving the flashing red and blue lights behind us. We head toward my beat-up Honda parked in the driveway, ready to drive away from the wreckage. The storm has finally passed, but the aftermath of exposing a 28-year lie is just beginning to unfold. The sirens fade into the distance, signaling the end of one life and the terrifying, beautiful commencement of another. It has been exactly 21 days since the flashing red and blue lights illuminated the manicured lawns of Maple Drive. I am sitting at a scratched Formica table in a small, cramped kitchen located in a quiet, working-class suburb. The sweet, warm aroma of freshly baked pecan pie fills the air, mingling with the rich scent of brewing dark roast coffee. There are no imported Persian rugs covering the floors here. There is no crystal glassware catching the light of an expensive chandelier. The linoleum squeaks slightly when someone walks across the room, and the refrigerator hums a loud, uneven tune in the corner. Yet, sitting in this modest space, wrapped in the comforting noise of clinking ceramic mugs and overlapping conversation, I feel infinitely richer than I ever did inside that sprawling colonial estate. The justice system often moves at a glacial pace, but irrefutable evidence acts as a powerful accelerant. Last Tuesday, the district attorney unsealed the federal indictments against my adoptive parents. Sylvia and Richard Jordan face multiple felony charges, including kidnapping across state lines, severe medical fraud, and the coordinated falsification of government documents. The scandal dominated the front page of the Seattle Times. The investigative article detailed how a prominent hospital administrator and a senior legal counsel weaponized their institutional authority to harvest a newborn infant from a vulnerable teenager. The structural collapse of their empire was swift and devastating. Richard was stripped of his law license pending trial. His prestigious downtown firm severed all ties within 48 hours, erasing his name from the frosted glass doors of their corporate suites and issuing a public statement condemning his actions. The invisible fortress of legal influence he spent his entire career building disintegrated under the undeniable weight of a single yellowed birth certificate. I heard through the lead prosecutor that Sophia attempted to leverage her country club connections to secure a lenient bail arrangement. She dialed every influential number in her contact list. Not a single person answered her calls. Uncle David, Aunt Martha, and the rest of the high society audience she cultivated so carefully vanished into the shadows, terrified of the toxic fallout associated with her crimes. The woman who ruled her pristine environment through fear and intimidation now sits in a sterile holding cell, stripped of her emerald silk blouses and her polished reputation. She has no audience left to manipulate. The illusion of her perfection is dead, and she is forced to live in the ruins. The collateral damage of their felony extends far beyond Clara and me. A week ago, my phone vibrated with a text message from an unsaved number. It was Chloe. The message was long, fractured, and filled with profound grief. She apologized. She told me she packed a suitcase and moved out of the colonial estate that very night, finding refuge on a friend's sofa. My sister woke up to the horrifying reality that her entire privileged existence was the direct byproduct of a nightmare. I replied to her text, thanking her for reaching out. We agreed to meet for coffee sometime next month. We are taking it slow. Rebuilding a sisterhood upon the ashes of a kidnapping requires delicate, cautious navigation. I harbor no resentment toward Chloe. She was just another prop in Sylvia's theatrical production, albeit one treated with far more care and affection. The sharp, cheerful ding of the oven timer breaks my reflection. Clara reaches for a pair of faded floral oven mitts resting on the counter. She pulls down the oven door and a blast of intense, sugary heat washes over the cramped kitchen. She carefully extracts a bubbling, golden brown pecan pie, setting it gently onto a wire cooling rack to rest. Aunt Diane stands near the stainless steel sink, rinsing coffee spoons, while Maya leans against the doorframe, teasing Clara about a slight burn mark on the crust edge. Clara laughs. It is that same deep, resonant, uninhibited sound I heard through the living room window on Thanksgiving night. It is the sound that shattered my heart and simultaneously gave me the courage to knock on her door. She turns around, holding a mismatched ceramic plate carrying a generous slice of the warm pie. She walks over to the Formica table and places the dessert directly in front of me. She slides a silver fork next to the plate and pours a fresh measure of coffee into my mug. She does not demand a thank you. She does not remind me how much the ingredients cost or complain about the time she spent baking. She does not imply that this simple slice of pie adds a tally mark to an invisible ledger of debts I must eventually repay through rigid obedience. She simply smiles, reaches out to brush a stray lock of dark auburn hair behind my ear, and tells me to eat before the filling gets cold. I pick up the fork. My hand does not tremble. I take a bite, and the sweet, rich flavor coats my tongue. I close my eyes, letting the physical warmth of the food and the emotional warmth of the room settle deep into my bones. For 28 years, I lived in a state of constant, suffocating anxiety. I navigated my daily existence trying to earn the love of a woman who was fundamentally incapable of providing it. I measured my worth by my ability to absorb Sylvia's toxicity without breaking, believing my compliance would eventually secure my place in her heart. I used to think the worst thing in the world was being locked out by your family. Standing on that freezing mahogany porch 3 weeks ago, staring at the locked brass deadbolt, I felt a rejection so profound I thought it would literally crush my chest. It turns out I was wrong. The worst thing in the world is being locked inside a life that was never yours to begin with. The worst thing is bending your spine, silencing your voice, and shrinking your soul to fit into a mold designed by people who view you as property rather than a person. Sylvia locking that door was not a punishment. It was a liberation. It forced me to walk away from the threshold of my own subjugation and drive toward the truth sitting in my glove box. Boundaries are often framed as defensive brick walls we build to keep toxic people away from our peace. But sometimes boundaries are the very door you walk through to find your way home. When you finally stop accepting the meager scraps of conditional affection thrown at your feet, you create the necessary space to discover what genuine, unscripted love actually feels like. If you are listening to this story right now and you know the agonizing, hollow pain of standing on the outside of a locked door, if you have ever had to sever ties with a family member to save your own sanity, I want you to hear this loud and clear. You are not crazy. You are not ungrateful. You are not the difficult burden they conditioned you to believe you are. Protecting your peace is not an act of betrayal. It is an act of survival. Do not let anyone rewrite your history, weaponize your gratitude, or dictate your worth. The transition into this new reality is not simple. Unlearning nearly 3 decades of fabricated history takes immense time and patience. Some mornings I wake up disoriented, expecting to see the sterile walls of my Seattle townhouse and dreading an incoming reprimand on my phone. But then I hear Clara humming a soul tune in the kitchen. I look in the bathroom mirror and see the hazel eyes I inherited from a woman who never stopped searching for her stolen child. The ghost of Harper Jordan fades a little more each day, replaced by the solid, undeniable truth of the woman standing in her place. Thank you for listening to my journey. Thank you for sitting with me through the storm and for understanding the profound courage it takes to walk away from the only world you have ever known. My name is Lily Bennett, and for the first time in my entire life, I know exactly who I am. We spend so much of our lives shrinking our own shadows just to fit inside rooms where we were never truly meant to sit. The hardest lesson to learn is that the documents binding us to a household do not automatically forge a family. Sometimes they merely construct a very comfortable, invisible cage. When affection is treated as a currency you must constantly earn through silence and rigid obedience, it ceases to be love and devolves into a hostage negotiation. The profound tragedy is that we often internalize the toxic scripts written for us, carrying the heavy, exhausting belief that we are difficult, ungrateful, or broken, simply because the people holding the pen are terrified of losing their grip on the narrative. But there is a quiet, staggering power in realizing that you hold the master key to your own life. And walking away from the only world you have ever known brings a unique kind of grief that doesn't fade overnight. Yet the moment you decide to stop paying off a fabricated debt, the air shifts, and you discover that boundaries are not just defensive walls you erect to keep the harm out. They are the heavy doors you finally push open to find your way home. Thank you for walking through this journey with me here on Sophia Told Stories. And if you have ever found yourself standing on the freezing porch of someone else's expectations, wondering if you have the courage to turn around, know that you are not the only one staring into the dark. We are all just trying to unlearn the fictions we were handed, seeking those rare, quiet spaces where we do not have to perform just to be worthy of a seat at the table. You might still flinch when a door closes too loud, or second-guess the warmth of a genuine embrace, wondering if there is a hidden cost waiting just beneath the surface. Healing is rarely a clean break. It leaves echoes in the quiet hours while you look in the mirror, tracing the lines of a face you are only just beginning to recognize, hoping the person looking back is finally allowed to stay.